Okay, and today's talk is titled SiTRSS. It's about security and trusted research systems and spaces. And we have two presenters today. We have Grace from University of New Hampshire, and we have Florence, formerly from Internet 2, currently with the editorial board for Blockchain and Healthcare Today. So I will turn it over to Grace, who I believe is going to be the first speaker.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Flo and I will be presenting on SiTRSS, and as we get started, we will look at what SiTRSS proposes to address, and we will look at some discussion topics. We will also look at SiTRSS use cases. We will look at how it impacts systems and spaces. We will look at the focus areas today as we have them within our particular member institutions. We will also look at how SiTRSS can address future domains. Future domains such as social, behavioral, and the economic sciences. We will also look at research data types and controlled unclassified information as it relates to data security. SiTRSS and blockchain, we will look at those two as security tools and framework in tandem, and also as IAM tools, which is identity and access management tools, and how those can leverage existing frameworks such as Science DMZ to improve security in scientific domains. We will also look at challenges and potential solutions, and we will close with an open discussion and/or Q&A. So what does SiTRSS address? We chose to pronounce it SiTRSS, takes on the very refreshing, secure, tasty meaning. It proposes to address security in trusted research systems and spaces. And by research systems, we are intended to focus on specific scientific research domains at member institutions, whereas research in security in research spaces, is intended to focus on shared resources and networks that are cross-institutional and that are interconnected with multiple research domains. Flo, can you advance?
I did. It's on the brainstorming bubbles. Can you see it?
On a moment, I think I'm having, there we go, thank you. I'm having internet issues, like I said, my apologies. So the topics we will look at today is CUI, which is controlled unclassified information in regards to research data, and essentially CUI addresses the quality of the CIA triad in
So Florence, it looks like she may have dropped off.
Yeah, so let me continue, and then when we can hear Grace again, she'll continue. So as Grace was discussing, this security and trusted research systems and spaces, there are a number of elements to it, and it's really, kind of a new thought, and there's an evolution opportunity here. We're really looking forward to what you all think about it too. So we'll talk about what this means in the specific research domains of Earth, Ocean, Space, physics, healthcare, life sciences, and genomics, which are very related. The CUI of research data, as we mentioned, and addressing the confidentiality in the CIA triad of security, the different data types and classifications, and then how do we establish trust with certain security frameworks and tools, some that we're already using today, and some that have the potential to add even more value into the future. So on chart 5, we see, as we look at some of the details and say, well, why is SiTRSS important? Why do we think it's something we want to focus on? in Earth, ocean, space, and physics, as actually as well in healthcare, life sciences, and genomics, there's increasing need and interest in data sharing amongst research collaborators. As a matter of fact, in the healthcare, life sciences, and genomics space, at the Cancer Moonshot Summit last year, actually it was perhaps 2 years ago now, but it's 2018, they were talking about the need to actually on purpose share more data. And one of the doctors actually was quoted in a subsequent journal to say that more people die because we don't share data versus because we do. So data sharing has a lot more, has always been important, but now it's becoming even more important in some areas where it wasn't done as much. And so we need the secure data transfer and sharing to prevent tampering of data, clean data collection, to prevent data theft and premature results disclosure with the intellectual property. And then some data collected can be marked proprietary and governed by CUI. And so we need safeguards on certain data types and classifications to meet the criteria, controls and safeguards. In healthcare, life sciences, and genomics, as well as in the other spaces too, there's an increase in usage of Internet of Things. And sometimes in this space, they'll call it the Internet of Medical Things, the Internet of Biomedical Things. But these things can be used for humans, for clinical information, for patient lifestyle data, as well as in clinical research and practice. And Internet of Things is also perhaps connecting to or managing large scientific instruments in EOS and physics as well. And we want to make sure that we can actually maintain data provenance, data security of the data that is actually moving between different devices. And future domains that Grace has been seeing are in the social, behavioral, and economic sciences at UNH. Grace, are you back?
I am. Thank you, Flo. Thank you for continuing the show while I dial in on my phone. All right. My apologies. I have internet connectivity issues. So as Flo was explaining, here at UNH, we're seeing that the social, behavioral, and economical sciences do have a need for data sharing, data analysis, data manipulation, data mining, and therefore we are now beginning to see that CUI, SiTRSS as we have it. And for those who were at Supercomputing Conference 2017 last fall in Denver, I presented a talk on SIM for HPC, which is cross-institutional model for HPC training of students. And essentially, we are looking to see how we can secure that kind of research space, that kind of learning space for students. And so as we dive deeper into the SBE sciences, we are seeing that those sciences, along with the typical traditional STEM-based sciences, will have a need for security in those research spaces. So moving forward, research data types and classification. As both Flo and I have had experience working with EMR, EHR, and patient health information, PHI, and we know those data types are specifically governed and have to meet HIPAA compliances and mandates. And as we look at the different scientific domains, in member institutions, we see that the genomic side of research, those data can be governed or can be safeguarded by CUI because of the systems through which they're accessed, because of the systems through which the data is traversed. And Flo will speak a little bit more on precision medicine and how that can be security can leverage that type of data.
Right, and so I can just chime in a little bit here, Grace. So we'll talk a little bit more about precision medicine later on, but as we look at precision medicine, there are a number of nodes, a number of data sources that come together. There's clinical care data, which can come in various, forms. It could be text, it could be image. There's clinical research data, which not only can be coming from different types of instruments, but could be in different human languages from around the planet. One of the opportunities and challenges that we have in some of these areas for clinical research and medical and healthcare and life sciences research is leveraging the data from the research being done around the planet every day. And humans won't know 100 different languages. Actually, some of them might, and doctors are brilliant. But there's an opportunity to actually leverage all this data that could have many different aspects to it. It could be genomic data coming from sequencers, local sequencers. It could be coming from NIH, NCI. There could be a lot of different elements, as well as the Internet of Things. So there are many different data types, so it's complicated to pull them together. But then as we look at getting insight from them, we also have to make sure at every step of the way that we're very cognizant of the SiTRSS issues.
Thank you, Flo. Continuing on to what is CUI. According to the Splunk webinar of 2017, July of 2017 last year, CUI, controlled unclassified information, is essentially any information that is not classified but still requires safeguarding and dissemination controls. The applicability of CUI is that the data is resident in non-federal information systems and organizations, which we could translate into, for instance, here at the UNH, we have the CCOM, which is the Center for Coastal and Oceanic Modeling, and we collect data from NOAA, which is a federal agency. And so we take data from NOAA, or we transfer data to NOAA. Now that data needs to, at some point in time, be put under CUI safeguards and controls because it resides in federal systems. NIST 800-171 is a subset of NIST 853. And not sure what slides we're seeing, but if we're onto the slide with the scuba diver, we can see that the NIST 800-171 essentially addresses the confidentiality of the CIA triangle, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And so in particular, CUI addresses the confidentiality of NIST 853.
Okay, we're on to the Science DMZ chart, Grace.
Okay, we have a Science DMZ here at UNH, and essentially the Science DMZ is that segmented network space that we have set up for research, and research in very many different domains, as we said earlier on, earth, ocean, and space sciences. And also we have research being done in physics, research being done in bioinformatics. And so those different domains, we have utilized the Science DMZ as the tool that will allow for fast and secure data transfer, utilizing the Globus tool, which is our IM tool here of choice. And we are looking to apply SiTRSS as a tool that can enhance the Science DMZ.
We're on to the template.
Thank you. The SiTRSS logic model, as you will see, the future work that we're hoping to implement, we first will need to assess the existing Science DMZ and to look at the different use cases for SiTRSS on the specific scientific domains. And we will also need to determine the applicability of SiTRSS based on the different data types that are being manipulated and analyzed on the actual domain. And so the output we're looking at would be, how do we implement SiTRSS as an identity access modeling tool in support of data integrity, which is another part of the CIA security triad. We are still in progress, and hence you will see that the third or the fourth and fifth columns are actually blank because it's a work in progress. And also the long-term outcome is that we will leverage SiTRSS as a complement to the existing security framework, which is the Science DMZ. And also, how can we leverage SiTRSS to support the training model that we are hoping to implement to train students, not just here at UNH, but across institutions and across HPC resources such as Exceed and MOOC and various other HPC and computing learning environments.
Excellent. And then, pardon me, go ahead.
Go ahead, Flo.
Okay, so then looking at blockchain as a potential, blockchain is, I believe, a piece of the future puzzle, the pieces of the puzzle for end-to-end trust and security going into the future. There's a lot of hype about Bitcoin, but that's just a use case of blockchain. The real opportunity that I felt from the beginning with blockchain is to actually leverage it for good, for security, for data provenance, for integrity of data. And the opportunity at each of our institutions, and it could be within a domain, it could be in the supply chain for the institution, there could be various areas, you can assess the potential of blockchain for specific domains. And then after you do that, you could pilot it, see what value does it bring, what challenges does it create. And as Jason was mentioning, beside being a special advisor for the Northeast Big Data Hub, on next generation internet activities and some EU collaboration that we're beginning. I'm also on the editorial board for a new journal, a scholarly journal called Blockchain and Healthcare Today. And what we're looking at is how blockchain can actually enable better integrity and security of the pharmaceutical supply chain, as an example. It could be a great tool to actually make sure that clinical research data is actually passed around properly, and that we know the data provenance, and we know that it hasn't been messed with. It could be used for information between devices communicating with each other in a clinical research environment, in a clinical care environment. And so there are opportunities to choose an area and then pilot it. And then perhaps introduce blockchain as a framework to meet the needs of the security CIA triad, or some of them. It's not perfect, there's a long way to go, but I believe there's a pony or a unicorn in there. And so the long-term outcome could be that blockchain can be leveraged globally by scientific domains as an info security framework, or a piece of it. We have, this is Grace's template, and I want to thank her for all the great work she did to put this together, but the whole presentation, but also the template, in that it could be, as you go into these SiTRSS areas or blockchain areas, as an example, and you look beyond the activities and outputs, perhaps you want to take some baby steps, kind of have a step function view, like what's the short-term outcomes we can get by trying this? What are the intermediate and then the long-term outcomes? So this is really a tool that we wanted to provide you all that you can use as a working tool as you move forward.
Thank you, Flo. Moving on to the identity and access management tools and frameworks for trust establishment. UNH currently implements Globus as the tool of choice for secure and reliable data transmission across various networks. We currently connect to various federal agencies such as NOAA, and we, from different sources, transfer that information to and from the UNH ScienceNet, or as it's also synonymously known, Science DMZ. And so there are other IAM tools out there. There's SAML, there's Shibboleth, there's InCommon, there's Federation, there's Grouper. We are looking particularly at how could we leverage the tool of choice that is being used in specific member institutions to apply SiTRSS, to make it a more holistic, secure environment for data transmission, as we look at the confidentiality piece that is now a mandate as of the 31st of December of 2017. So we will certainly, as we saw on the previous slide, we will look at what is currently in place and how can SiTRSS enhance what is already in place. This is not a forklift approach. This is a augmented approach to bolster what is already in place. Moving on, this is just a diagram of how UNH utilizes Globus. And as you can see, and I mentioned earlier on, the Center for Coastal and Oceanic Modeling here at UNH, we utilize Globus. As you can see, the purple arrow pointing out to Globus as a tool goes out and is being used to connect the data at NOAA and vice versa. And of course, you see the UNH Science DMC or ScienceNet being utilized as the backbone for that data transmission. I will now hand over to Flo, who will continue on with the presentation. Thank you, Flo.
Thank you very much, Grace. Great job. So as we think about SiTRSS, it's not like security and trust are brand new. These are things we've been working on for many, many years. They're just becoming more and more important. And as Grace was mentioning, going into new domain areas. So one of the things that we mentioned briefly is that the Internet of Things, was considered a hype type of thing. Now it's all around us. And IoT connectivity actually creates more risk for campus scientific workflows and healthcare. It's interesting, we had a discussion about this at the WISE meeting, W-I-S-E, and some of you on the phone may be working or familiar with WISE, but WISE is a group that's led by a couple of our friends around the world. One of them is Hannah Short at CERN and some others. And it stands for WISE, Information Security, I believe, in Connected e-infrastructures. And when we were talking about the Internet of Things, they were saying, some of the people were saying, when you have like a very specific, one of a kind, large scientific tool, why would somebody bother hacking it? Well, unfortunately, because they want to create havoc or whatever it is. And then interestingly, when the neutron stars collided, one of the telescopes in Australia, actually the system supporting it and managing it was hacked. And so they really thought they were going to miss it, but they had to send somebody and they fixed it, and then they were able to get to it. So everything is really at risk if it's connected. As I always say, everything's discoverable and everything is hackable if it's connected. So we really have to do our due diligence and really understand what the risks are. And that's part of this opportunity for security and trusted research systems and spaces, is to how do we make sure they're trusted, right? How do we know that we can trust the things, the people, the services, the software, the devices, trying to connect with them. There's also healthcare device hacking. And as you know, with any type of hacking, once you get in and you go wide, you can get to a lot of other things. And it could also be in the building that you're in, that your scientific tools are in, or the researchers are in, or the students are in, that those can be hacked as well. Whether it's locks that can be hacked. I know I was at an institution, one of the universities a number of years ago when I was still at IBM, where I was before Internet 2. And we were having a discussion how they put in all these electronic locks. And one of the gentlemen who had originally been at QRadar took out his wallet and said, "Oh, I have a card right here. I can get into every one of those right now," right? And so we know the challenges we have. We also know that some of these devices can be commandeered and actually used to hack out somewhere else. I think of it as kind of wax on and wax off, like the Karate Kid. It's hack in and hack out. They can hack into a device, or they can commandeer devices such as, cameras and things like in the Dyn attack, and then attack some of these other devices. So there's a lot of risk to think about. And so what we want to do is really make sure that we can assess the risk and then take some action to reduce it. So one of the frameworks that was created, so now besides SiTRSS, you have TIPS, is a framework that was created about 2 years ago in a workshop on end-to-end trust and security for the Internet of Things that was hosted by the IEEE Internet Initiative, the National Science Foundation and Internet 2. And it was held at George Washington University. And it was as a result of that workshop, and you could look it up online, IEEE has a report out there, we came up with this framework called TIPS, Trust, Identity, Privacy, Protection, Safety, and Security. And the idea is that the users and the makers of devices need to be thinking about all these elements. And this really dovetails very nicely with SiTRSS because of the trust and security. So trust, allowing only designated people or services to have device or data access. Validating the identity of the people, the services, and the things. You know, how do you validate the identity of the things? I know when Kane Klingenstein and I were at a CSG meeting a couple of years ago, and we started talking about the Internet of Things, you know, he was saying, how do you, validate, things? How do you do two-factor authentication? What's your mother's maiden name? ST13579. What is it that we're going to do to validate that? How do we ensure privacy of the device? Personal and sensitive data, that it's kept private? How do we protect devices and users from harm, physical, financial, or reputational? Safety for devices, infrastructure, and people. What if they can get into something and reverse some type of motor and then, create havoc somewhere? And security, maintaining security. So this TIPS framework is something that we've been trying to get more and more people to think about so that we can protect the people, the infrastructure, and our systems moving forward. And IoT security is of growing importance in research and education. IoT is everywhere on campus. The scientific instruments, some of them have old, unpatched, Microsoft or DOS systems. You probably know some of them. You might be like, smirking right now that I have one of those. Custom instruments or new devices. The devices in the buildings of the infrastructures are hackable, cameras, building management systems. We can use network segmentation, but are we always doing that? Is it air-gapped? Is it not? Are we always making sure that we're keeping things separate where we can? Students are bringing many devices to campus, connecting to the network. Guests are bringing devices to campus. And then IoT devices, of course, are connecting and sometimes, in some situations, managing scientific instruments. And so multiple scientific domains are in this focus, just as we've been talking about all along. And the risks would include scientific data integrity, which is critical, as we know, availability of the data, and all the other risks we discussed: reputational, financial, physical, operational confidentiality. So then we looked at, what is the risk? And this is something that the ITANA organization, working with Internet 2, has a working group going on regarding enterprise Internet of Things. And ITANA is an organization that stands for IT Architects in Academia. And it's under kind of the EDUCAUSE and Internet 2 kind of wings. They kind of are the wind beneath their wings. And they have a working group going on. And this was from one of the organizations, one of the universities. They actually looked at all the devices on their network, and half of them were unknown. Now, you might say, well, that's not a big deal. But then you might say, well, what are they? And who can get to them? And how do I learn more? And so it really makes sense to learn as much as we can about where the risks might be, so we can focus on security and trusted research systems and spaces. So some of the activities that are going on to address IoT related to security that affects the SiTRSS area are that Internet 2 actually had an IoT systems risk management task force, and they had deliverables that are on the Internet 2 Chief Innovation Office wiki at this point. And two of the deliverables are, one is how to find devices connected to your campus network, leveraging Shodan or Census. And there's some other tools you could use too. These are open source tools. And often what I find is that people will say, it's not a big deal. And I know I know at least 2 universities who told me that they thought, oh, this can't be a big deal. Then they ran the report and they were like, oh my gosh, that's on there? And then they lock it down, and some of these universities are using these tools every day now. And then also IoT vendor management considerations for higher ed. And I really want to thank Chuck Benson from the University of Washington and Jan Cheatham from UW-Madison, who were the leaders of these efforts. And there were many people across research education that participated as well. And this tool, it's a white paper that helps think through the considerations of, as devices come onto campus or are created or developed, you know, as specific scientific instruments could be, what are the things you have to think about? You know, what is it connected to? Where does the data feed come from? Who manages that data feed? Are there, you know, passwords that need to be changed? Who's doing that? Who controls the service? So that's just some thinking that can be done as you do assessments of your SiTRSS risk and opportunity. Then I mentioned the joint ITANA and Internet 2 Enterprise IoT Working Group, and the deliverables are there. And these are hot links. And Jason, I tried to send it to you twice. I hope it got through the second time. It's kind of big. If not, we'll figure it out. To hopefully post it. And then we also had these discussions at PERC regarding cybersecurity needs in HPCE infrastructures. We talked about some of the new cybersecurity research that's coming out and how we can help accelerate it into practice through an eager grant that I was the PI on at Internet 2 on accelerating cybersecurity research to practice, and Internet 2 is still has. And then we also just started the discussion with CASC, the Coalition for Academic Scientific Computation. And then the US NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, actually had a number of working groups that some people in the R&E community participated in. I know Mark Cather from UMBC in particular was working on that. I was, and a number of others. And they have some materials they've created about what to think through with brownfield and greenfield opportunities, you know, devices that exist and new devices and systems that are created. So there are a number of things going on, but there's still a lot more to be done. To dive into one of the newer areas, the healthcare life sciences and genomics area as it relates to precision medicine, this is just a little picture to help us think through, what does this really mean? You know, where's all this data coming from? What do we have to worry about? You know, where are the gates that things have to go through, and how do we provide a SiTRSS type of framework to support it? And as we look at precision medicine, it will increasingly leverage technology to analyze volumes of data, genomics, clinical research, clinical care, connected health and life sciences data, plant and animal genomic data, human genomic data, to improve insights and outcomes. But there's always a risk that someone will try to get to the data. And so what we have to do is try to keep it as safe as possible all along the way. And this is an example on page 19 of how blockchain technology might actually have some promising value for use cases in healthcare. Also, supply chain, as I was mentioning before, the pharma supply chain or the information supply chain. And as you can see on the left, there can be patient-generated data, there can be handheld data, there's EMR, EHR data. You know, when you're talking about an academic medical center, they're using this information to do research and to do teaching. And then we see that it can go into data lakes, you know, volumes of data that they're trying to get context and insight out of so that they can improve outcomes. So there's a lot of opportunity to do more data sharing, to actually improve outcomes, you know, doing well and doing good. But there's also risk. Every time you see, you know, a connection, you really have to think about how you keep it secure. So as we look at the tools we have today and future improvement opportunities in the SiTRSS world, we talked about the tools we have in trust and identity and IAM, or identity and access management, Shibboleth, SAML, InCommon, EdgeRoam, Globus, Grouper. There are security audits, assessments, and evaluations you do now. It could be that there are some new types of evaluations you want to do and assessments regarding IoT data perhaps, or the confluence of the different types of data and devices. Science DMZ is a great tool that ESNet has provided, and it just brings so much value. And Eli Dart, I think, was one of the key authors and creators of that. And then network segmentation is becoming more and more deployed. It could be different segments for IoT, guest networks, enterprise, at the student admin or education level, and on the research side. to be able to protect the data that you have, but allow people within that domain or within that world to share the data. And so there are also policies that have to be considered. There could be campus level policies, there could be regulatory mandates, federal mandates. There could be policies amongst scientific researchers that work in a certain domain area. And we have to think more and more about that as we move forward. And then the future opportunities, one is, and this is about all of us, how do we evolve the citrus ecosystem, which is us, all of us, and more people, you know, across campuses, leveraging Globus, Exceed, by domain, across domains. How can we make things better and safer? How do we leverage blockchain as an example? Is there an opportunity there for research, data provenance, integrity for longitudinal research to results processes? I was looking at some NSF reports recently, and I think they're starting to use this term more, research to results, kind of like transition to practice. And workflow management, data or unit of work supply chain. I was talking to one of the CIOs in one of the universities, and he was saying that he thought it might be interesting to think about units of work in the Exceed ecosystem and how you track them with blockchain. Very interesting. And then identity and access management. And then there may be a cultural evolution opportunity as well for data management. One, you know, if we look at years ago, it was centralized data. You know, then it's decentralized, and you know, people are taking control. And now a lot of things are hybrid, right? It's centralized, it's decentralized, it's even down at the edge. So there's a lot to think about how we can support the cultural evolution, leveraging this distributed big data and analytics world, while we consider the security and trusted research systems and spaces. So it's always great to talk to and listen to experts. I know there's the Hebrew University of Jerusalem gave me a gift one time, and I keep it over my desk at home. It says, "It is the province of knowledge to speak, and it is the privilege of wisdom to listen," because we learn when we listen. And so there's a webinar coming up. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are very familiar with the CTSC and CCOE, the Center for Trustworthy Scientific Cyber Infrastructure, and the NSF Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. There's a webinar on January 29th, 2018 at 11 a.m. Eastern on the security program at the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope, LSST. And so if you follow Von Welch on Twitter, you can see it in case you take a picture of your screen, which is what I do when I look at these webinars now, so I can capture it. But Jason will also have the charts, but you can actually register for it. The talk will be presented by Alex Withers. Alex is a senior cybersecurity engineer at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, NCSA, and the information security officer for the LSST. And as they say in the abstract, is that the LSST conducts a digital image-based survey over an enormous area of the sky, builds an extensive astronomical catalog over the course of 10 years, lots of data, you know, Earth, ocean, and space. This is space. And the ultimate deliverable is data to its users. And it presents many cybersecurity challenges. LSST has in place a cybersecurity program to facilitate its scientific mission to protect its data, access requirements and rights. And we talked a lot about identity and access management, but there's still more to do. You know, so they're going to discuss the beginnings of LSST's cybersecurity program, adoption and experience with its risk management framework. You know, risk management is ongoing, and existing and planned security operations at LSST sites, including the observatory site in Chile and the national and the NCSA. So I think it'll be very interesting. And if you're more interested in this area, I would keep an eye on what the CCOE and CTSC are doing, because they always do wonderful work. And their presentations are recorded and include time for Q&A. Then we have a small sample of other resources and reading materials on Internet of Things, tips, this framework we talked about, which is trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security, and cybersecurity. There's a white paper or a brochure from KPMG talking about security in the IoT ecosystem. EDUCA has actually had an article in June of 2016 about IoT is here, and it introduces the TIPS framework. I was lucky enough to write a chapter in a book from Elsevier in and Handbook of Statistics on Cognitive Computing Theory and Applications, looking at IoT and cognitive computing and actually how they can work together to provide more insight regarding the volumes of data and all these different data types that you can leverage in your research and in practical application. And then Mark Cather, the UMBC CISO, and I actually wrote a chapter in a book on tips in smart cities that was published by College Publications out of the UK just this past summer. And so there's always more we can do and think about, and we really want this to be an area that keeps going, that there are derivatives of this thinking, that traditional work is done, just like any good research. Let's keep going. So now we'd like to go to the Q&A. And if you'd like to reach either Grace or myself, our emails are there. For those of you who are who maybe aren't looking at the charts, Grace is grace.wilson.caudill@unh.edu, and I'm flo1980@alumni.princeton.edu. And we really thank you for having us. Jason, thank you. Grace, thank you for inviting me to present with you, and thank you everyone for participating.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Flo, and thank you for all the participants. Flo, there is a chat, there's a Q&A or Q in the chat window.
Sure. So
I'll go ahead and read it.
Go ahead. You can read it. I was going to right now, but go for it.
All right. It says, a key tenet of blockchain is transparency. This fact works well for data provenance. How do you see modified applicability in privacy in healthcare? Private, blockchain, or something else?
That is exactly the question. I totally agree with you. One of the opportunities and challenges with blockchain is transparency and privacy, and those sound like opposites. So as we deploy blockchain, that's one of the key areas that I think we have to look closer at. So as we start doing pilots and as we're attracting papers and manuscripts for this Blockchain and Healthcare Today journal, we're highlighting some of those open areas that still have to be proven. So it could be private blockchain, it could be something else. You know, the way I see blockchain right now, I say it's kind of like when we started creating cars and you had to crank them. I mean, if we stopped, that's what we would still be doing if we stopped innovating. But today we have Teslas and Lamborghinis and, you know, all these cool things. So there's more work to be done in this area. So I think private blockchains, kind of like a VPN, but it's a private blockchain, could be part of it. But when you're talking about areas like healthcare, as an example, even though blockchain is a distributed ledger technology, we really have to think about the regulatory issues that need to be addressed, right? So who's going to be keeping an eye on all this stuff? Do we just let the blockchain act like a scrum in rugby and they just manage themselves, or is there something else that's going on? So I think there's going to be an evolution of the technology and the regulation to ensure that we can maintain the privacy that's required while having the transparency of the data to ensure data provenance, supply chain reliability, EHR, EMR, and medical records not being compromised and getting to where they need to go, and we keeping track of them. So I think both of your ideas could be correct. I think there could be something else, and there could be private blockchains, and I think there's going to be a regulatory side to it too. You know, the way we had on the chart, we're going from centralized to distributed to hybrid data models. Blockchain, that could apply to blockchain as well. You know, we're going from centralized data management and data regulation to this distributed blockchain model, but what's the hybrid? And I think that's one of the key questions in healthcare as well as in transportation, very honestly. You know, I think of autonomous vehicles, and I think of, you know, these cars where they have no steering wheel at all, which, you know, for control freaks, that's an issue, right? But they're saying, oh, it's more safe. But, you know, what if a little kid runs in front of the car doesn't have time to phone home in Germany and say, so should I stop? Right? So there's some type of local edge management and perhaps a local blockchain where we make sure the data isn't hacked, that they don't hide the information from the vehicle or from the instrument within the vehicle that's checking it out and keeping track of it. But then who's keeping track of all that information? So I think there's going to be a hybrid model in a number of these areas. So I really encourage you to keep the thinking going. please reach out to me if you would like to submit a paper to Blockchain in Healthcare Today, or you know somebody. At this point, we're attracting what we call the good, the bad, and the ugly, or what I call, there are some things we know blockchain can help with. There's some things that maybe aren't ready or could go wrong. And then there's some stuff that really has to be figured out. And so we're looking to share all of that information so we can all learn from it and move the ball forward together. So that's an excellent question. Thank you for your perspective. Did that help, Joe?
So while we wait for Joe to type, okay, he says yes. Thank you both again for presenting on this topic today. As being a relative neophyte when it comes to security, I think it would actually be helpful. And, if you don't mind doing so, maybe just give a 2 to 3 second, maybe minute explanation of what blockchain is. I think that a lot of us hear words and we're thrown lots of words on a daily basis. How does it work? And just give an example of how it can be applied in the healthcare space.
Sure. So blockchain is, I'll give you a couple of different analogies depending on how each of our brains works, different things click. So some people call it a distributed set of smart contracts where devices and data elements are part of something that's distributed but managed as contracts of information, data provenance, and managing the data. So some people call it that. It's also, what we more say about it is that it's a distributed ledger technology. If you think of ledgers in the old days, the accountants that would have a ledger and all the numbers go on the ledger, all the information about the assets go on the ledger. That's what blockchain allows you to do, is to have this, this secure, non-changeable ledger, which keeps track of things, data. So as an example, if you were to use one of the issues in healthcare, and many years ago, I know when I was at IBM, we were doing some work on this, and I think that it was in Nigeria or Kenya at the time, and there is a lot of counterfeit pharmaceuticals, right? So a pharma company create a batch of pharmaceuticals, medicine, send it out, and then sometimes the real pharmaceuticals are taken out and then actually replaced with bad stuff, or bad stuff is added to the batch. So the opportunity is to have an identifier, whether it's an RFID tag or some way that you're capturing information to make sure that that specific thing, where it started, it ends up where it's supposed to be, and there's nothing else getting in the way, that something else doesn't replace it, that something else isn't added to the batch. They're also using it for food management as an example, which could be a healthcare issue, right? So IBM actually has, I was just looking the other day, they have a cute little video that's kind of whimsical, but they show someone picking a tomato and then putting it in a pot, and then it goes into a jar of sauce, and then it's served over spaghetti. The idea is that what you can do is have an identifier on the vat or the case that the tomato is in. And then if there's a problem like E. coli or some type of issue, you can actually very quickly, through data provenance, knowing where that tomato came from and every place it went and everything who touched it, that you can actually go all the way through that supply chain and then make sure that you stop it at the source, stop the issue at the source, whether the source is at the beginning or in the middle. And so those are some examples of how you could use blockchain in healthcare. Another example would be when you think about the data between devices and EHRs and EMRs as an example. There are a couple of issues when it comes to security and trust. One is that devices can be hacked. You might have seen that the FDA announced on August 29th, I believe it was, the US FDA, that there are 465,000 implanted pacemakers that need a firmware update. Are you kidding me, right? So what you want to do is make sure that the data that's coming from that device is actually coming from that device. It's actually the data that was initially stored and wasn't changed. And as the doctor leverages an EHR EMR to go from the EHR EMR, from the cloud, through the server, through the network, through the My Cloud in grandma's house and into her device, that you can actually keep track of the information to make sure that it hasn't been compromised. So those are a couple of examples of how you could use blockchain. The reason they call it a smart contract is that the devices and the data elements kind of have a contract with each other. You know, that they're going to all hold hands and keep track of the data so that they can maintain integrity of the data, of the system, of the connections, to make sure that things are not compromised and people aren't hurt. So that's the idea behind blockchain. Does that help?
Yes, thanks for the explanation. So do we have any other questions? Please type them in if so. Otherwise, I'll thank our speakers again. And I'll give a little bit of a preview for next week's talk. We're going to have Michael Sinatra from ESNet, and he's agreed to sort of give an overview of cryptography. So perhaps that'll be a little bit of a follow-on to some of the topics today. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions, so thank you both again. We'll make sure to get this posted to the website, and I do have your slides, both of you, so I'll be able to put those up as well.
Excellent, thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Enjoy your weekend.
All right, thanks all.
Thank you all, bye-bye.